Hi, everyone. On behalf of Perimeter 81, thank you all for joining us for this exciting new webinar, Demystifying the Realities of SASE. I would like to give everyone a brief look at the slide for the agenda before we get started. I want to do a quick speaker introduction so you get to meet myself and everyone that's joining us for this. After that, we are going to go into a series of different SASE myths that we would like to debunk tonight and today. And as well, we are going to do a Q&A with Amit and Zeus, who are joining us here today. So we have from Perimeter 81, Amit Bereket, who's a co-founder and CEO. As well, we have Zeus Caravala, who's an influencer and principal analyst at ZK Research. And myself, I'm the digital marketing producer and the moderator for tonight's events, and I'm Michael Suzanne. So, Amit, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself before we begin?
Yes, so hi everyone. It's very nice speaking here today, and thank you for joining. My name is Amit. I'm the co-founder and the CEO of Perimeter 81. I'm a technologist, and at Perimeter 81, we're building the next generation of firewalls in the cloud, basically speaking, moving away from a traditional appliance-based network security into a cloud edge-delivered platform that unifies both networking and security through the cloud edge.
Amazing. Perfect. Thank you. And Zeus, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Zeus Caravala. As you mentioned, I'm the principal analyst and founder of ZK Research. I've been running my own research firm for about 10 years. Before that, I was actually the chief research officer at Yankee Group. As an analyst, I cover primarily, I cover most things in the network and security and communication space, but I focus primarily on the emerging technologies. And so that's today that's a lot of 5G, SD-WAN, SASE, things like that. I find the whole topic of SASE fascinating because when I was listening to Amit talk about building more security services at the edge, one of the first reports I wrote back in 2001 was about the whole concept of IP services being built from the cloud and just never really manifested itself. But today it looks like we have all the technology to do that. So it's this is a good topic and something that's been in demand for a long time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to let everyone else in the audience that's here with us, I want you guys to know that there's a question window available. So we are going to have a Q&A session at the end. So feel free to drop a line, ask a few questions if there's anything that maybe wasn't covered or that you would like to know more about. And I'll make sure that we try to get to all the questions throughout the session.
And I'd like to please ask away. I know there's a lot of questions about this, and companies struggle a lot with it. It's a very new way of doing security and networking. So don't be shy and ask away.
Yeah, definitely. So without further ado, the first myth that we would actually like to share is SASE should be deployed in one go. Amit, do you want to take the first stab at debunking this particular myth? SASE should be deployed in one go.
Actually, it's a good point. I think that we speak a lot around SASE about the replacement of the traditional firewalls and networking, and it might sounds very appealing from one end, but sounds also very frightening and scary, right? What are you going to do with all the firewalls and the infrastructure that I've invested millions of dollars into building? Should I throw it away? It runs my business. How can I basically change overnight my entire networking and infrastructure from one way that people are working, and it is working, right, to a completely different way? It's not this or that. It's this and that. One of the advantages of SASE that it's a cloud-based, software-driven solution that very, very easily integrates to your existing infrastructure and allowing you, like as an extension, to slowly shift part of the use cases, right, from the on-premise firewalls and your networking or security infrastructure to the cloud edge. Give you an example. You can start implementing SASE just by implementing remote access and to migrate from VPNs to a zero trust based solution, or even to start only with your third parties, right? Not all your entire employee base, but only with your third parties, migrate them to access your environment using a zero trust solution that the SASE platform provides. And as you gain more confidence and you implement more features and you migrate it, and the way you are able to migrate off your existing environments is also lowering your cost down, lowering the your licensing and load on your appliances. And of course, SASE is still not yet matured, right? It's being built constantly. It's a software that is live and kicking. That there will be more and more solutions unified to that solution. So as you migrate off, right, to SASE, those type of solutions like Perimeter 1, for example, will provide you the needs for today, but also the needs for tomorrow, and to go with you.
Perfect. Zeus, I'm sure you have something to share on that one.
It's actually refreshing to hear it talk that way. I work with a lot of startups in the space, and most of them try and get customers to do a big lift and shift and a big forklift upgrade and replace all those parts, and that's highly disruptive to the organization. And I think historically, when you look at any technology, whether it's cloud or even IPVPN or VoIP or whatever, the ability to just replace everything in one go is it's highly disruptive to the organization and actually leads to a lot of problems that were unforeseen. I think if you're going to go down the SASE road, a better approach, as Amit said, is you can start with a few, maybe in this era of work from home, just start using the technology to be able to secure those at-home workers or your smaller branch offices. But what you want to be able to do is start with smaller pilot programs, get some good lessons learned, some good best practices, and then as you migrate, you can avoid a lot of the gotchas. And I think that with SASE in particular, the risks are pretty high, right? Because you're dealing with security infrastructure here, and as I think there's certainly no shortage of security news today and breaches that happen. When you look at SolarWinds and things like that, every company, even the most sophisticated, are vulnerable. And so the ability to be able to take your on-prem things and migrate the policies over and migrate all the configuration parameters over it's unrealistic to expect companies to do that. And so my advice to companies is take your time, to plan out a good solid migration strategy, work with a company like Perimeter 1 that's willing to work with what you have currently, because that's, the other part of that too, as Amit said, there's a big sunken cost, right, to what you've already spent. And so you might have things on a certain, 3, 5, 7 year amortization cycle. And so you want to get the life out of those and then be able to migrate as time goes on. And so I think if your vendor's telling you that you need to, hurry up and migrate all things SASE overnight, they're not doing you any favors. And so this is something that I think, discretion is the better part of, is better here just to be safe.
Definitely. Yeah, very well said.
Zeus, one point that I would like to stress, an interesting point that you've mentioned, I would just like to reiterate to our audience, is that SASE is a software solution, and the licensing is very flexible. So you can start very, very small with a minimal cost, right? And to make the preparation as you migrate, when you compare it with on-premise firewalls and appliances, you need to make large investments in the beginning in order to get started. Here it's the opposite down, right? So it's very easy to get started, start small, grow it, get your confidence, make sure that all the environment is secured and increase productivity, and get started from there.
Yeah, I think in fact a good way to think about SASE is it's brought a lot of cloud principles to security, right? So you think in the business world and in the IT world, almost all areas of IT have migrated to this cloud model, right? Be it applications or infrastructure development or storage or compute, except for security and networking. And I think that's a good way to think about it, is how you don't take your app infrastructure and overnight, move it to AWS overnight, right? You do it in phases. In fact, a lot of organizations have multiple teams. They have ones that run the legacy, and then they have, ones that, focus on the new things. So even if the strategy was, as I bring new branches on, if you've got a couple of those being deployed, or you're going through a merger and acquisition, might use SASE to facilitate the security there, and then slowly over time, get to the legacy. That's a good way to think about it. But I think the underlying theme here is cloud, right? So because it's cloud, because it's utilization based, because it's subscription, it gives you just a lot more flexibility than what you might have had, but in the old world of appliances.
Perfect. For our next myth, Zeus, I actually want you to kick off with this one. I know you're an SDWAN expert, and the second myth is SASE starts with SDWAN. Is that true, or can we debunk this myth?
Well, it's both true and not true. I guess it's really with Schrodinger's cat, right? When the state of the cat is both dead and alive at the same time. It's kind of like that. I mean, you can start with SD-WAN. In fact, if you look pre-pandemic, a lot of organizations had started down the SD-WAN path, and what drove them to SASE was the fact that if they're doing direct internet breakout from those local branches, you can't really secure those cost effectively without SASE, right? So SASE wound up being the way to secure SD-WAN. Now, what's happened post-pandemic, or during the pandemic, is a lot of companies send people home, so they don't have the same branch infrastructure that they used to. And so a lot of those SD-WAN deployments were put on hold, but that doesn't mean you should hold your SASE, right? Because SASE does, the ability to deploy security out of the cloud. For the first time ever, we're able to give people that work from home, work in small offices, corporate-grade security. In fact, it's a good way to think about it is that I can use SASE to facilitate a secure return to work. Right, and so as because every country's in a different position. I know Israel's almost fully open. The U.S. we're getting there. Countries like India and Canada, things like that, are a little bit behind. And so from an organizational perspective, I can use it to facilitate the work from home. And as I bring people back to the offices, a global company like yourself can help facilitate that. And so I think, you're right. And initially, pre-pandemic, people were using SASE as a way to secure SD-WAN. So the starting point was SD-WAN. Today, though, I think the starting point is SASE, and then we think about network transformation on the back end of that. But I certainly wouldn't slow it down, because I think it can provide benefits into all those other areas.
Amit, thoughts? What do you think? Does SASE start with SD-WAN?
I think that SASE has three main use cases that you can relate on when you think about SASE. The first one is remote access. We call it outside to inside. Okay, our employees going from outside to inside the network. The second use case is internet security. We call it inside to outside, how you provide a unified security to employees, regardless if they're inside the office or outside the office. When they're accessing the internet, and the internet today is the corporate network, you provide the same grade of security, right? Regardless if you're inside the office or behind the firewall or at the home. The third use case is interconnectivity, SD-WAN type of use case, which we call internal to internal. I think each one of the use cases can be used in SASE separately, regardless to it's not a building blocks that need to be built one on another. Each organization can start in different direction, right? There are different vendors also. There are vendors that are more matured in the SD-WAN piece. There are vendors that are more matured in remote access, like Perimeter 1, for example. But everything is built on top of that cloud edge network, okay, that you deliver, basically the bloodstream of the organization, you can think about. Basically a network that is delivered, a secure network that is delivered over the cloud, over the internet. And on top of that network, you implement the different use cases, as I mentioned, okay? SD-WAN has little bit more features, right? Allow you to optimize traffic between branches, but not necessarily it relates to either network security, internet security, or remote access, okay? So each one of them is completely separate. It's all about what is your biggest concern. Now with COVID, for example, people went outside the office, as Zeus mentioned, right? And need for SD-WAN to optimize traffic between branches went down significantly, but remote access increased 10 times, right? So that's also something to take into account.
Yeah, and it's remote access without the complexity of your traditional, type of VPN where you got to download clients on everybody's computer. You got to make sure they're completely up to date and things like that. So, I think one of the things that people forget too is there's always been a group of people, workers, 20-25% that work from home, that were used to working remotely, and those people were very comfortable with making sure that the anti-malware on the computer was up to date, that they had a good router at home that had a firewall on it, that their VPN client was kept up to date, things like that. But a lot of the people going to work from home today have never worked from home before, and so they're not going to be comfortable with that traditional remote access technology. So if you think that you can secure your office or secure your organization with traditional remote access, and then VPNing back to a corporate headquarters where you attach that big company firewall, that's unrealistic, because so many of the people just aren't really used to that, right? The learning curve is very high, and so I think what SASE does is, even without SD-WAN, is it lets you securely connect all those remote workers. So I think the three use cases you outlined there, that today is is a critical one. But again, because you use the word cloud again, because it is cloud-based, it does create a lot of flexibility. So you can do SD-WAN first, you can do SASE first, you can do it at the same time, right? It really depends on what's comfortable for the organization. In fact, they might choose all three of those strategies depending on what part of the region that they're of the world that they're in, and what the status of reopening is. So what the cloud and software gives you flexibility that you've never had in the network before, and so that's, you don't have to think of it just doing it one way.
Definitely, well said. Moving on, for the next myth that we have, myth number 3, SASE is a complicated security model. So secure access service edge is a complicated security model. What do we think? Zeus, do you want to take this one again?
Yeah, again, that it's a bit of a yes and no. There's more options with SASE, right? So you can think about like the traditional security model for enterprise corporate security was pretty simple, right? You had a hub and spoke network, and you bought a lot of really expensive equipment that you put in that hub location, and you ran all your traffic through that. Now, while that was very simple, it didn't really work. In fact, one CISO said to me, the reason they were looking at SASE is because the traditional security model has never worked, isn't working, and isn't ever going to work. And so, because there was too many blind spots. You think of all the different access methods that companies have now between remote workers and Wi-Fi and things like that. It missed a lot of things. And so, what SASE brings is a higher level of agility, right, and more options. But when you have more options, it can increase complexity in that you need to think a little more architecturally about how you deploy things. But once you've done that, right, then it actually radically simplifies things. Because the historical way, if I wanted to do split tunnel from a branch office, I would actually have to deploy all those expensive big iron in that branch office, and then I'd have to manage it that way. And I talked to an organization a little while ago that tried just doing multiple firewalls, in for redundancy purposes in every branch office. And this was only a mid-sized company, like 100 or so locations. And he said the complexity level of trying to manage all those policies, making sure configurations were kept up to date, making sure everything was consistent across the network was so high that it just wasn't worth it. And so I think the initial barrier to entry while you're trying to figure out the architecture of SASE can be a little more complicated than the traditional model of centrally locate everything. But again, remember, that doesn't work, right? We've all experienced that. But at the back end of it, once you get into day one, day 2 operations, it's much, much simpler because you have a centralized console in which you can manage everything from. And then if you want to be able to make a change to an ACL or a policy, you can just push it out across your network all at once. And so I do think that there is sort of anytime you change things, there's an initial barrier to entry which you have to go through. But once you do that here, it's you're going to just have an environment that's so much simpler than what you had before.
Right. I will follow up with Zeus and say that generally SASE looks like complex, right? It's multi-regional, it's multi-tenant, it includes sophisticated network in the cloud edge. But at the end, it's very simple concept and very simple implementation. You can think about SASE as a software solution that is delivered from the cloud, right? Like Office 365. Think about the like Office 365 for network security. It's very simple, right?
Yeah.
And it's delivered very easily, very modern, right? And modern technologies. The UI and user experience is modern, not from the 90s. And that basically gives you a complete different experience, right? End to end. I usually call it like the transition from Nokia to iPhone. iPhone is more complex, but it's much easier to use and it's much more enriched, right? And it can take you to a completely different heights. And the advantage of SASE services that they are software based. And I'm reiterating it again because the ability to develop new features, new solutions, and walk with you, right, end by end through the journey, and to unify a cybersecurity experience into a single platform that is user-centric, right, regardless to the location, all devices, all cloud environments, everything from a single place is huge. And I believe it would be basically the baseline, which we will see in the next 2 to 3 years. Large enterprises are migrating, right, from 5 to 10 different buyers they currently have for different security services to one buyer that basically manages everything from a single place very easily, right? Reducing the amount of resources need to manage it, reduce the number of vendors that you work with. And that's something that will disrupt the way we work. And I feel that although SASE is well-defined and now, like for example, we have more than 1,500 customers that are utilizing our services as the corporate network, just in the beginning of the beginning and where it will be, right? Just in 2 to 3 years from now is something like completely different level, and because the ability and the agility of such services.
Yeah, in fact, I like those analogies that you used. If you think of the O365 model versus the traditional deployment model, how often would you, in that old model where everybody had Word and Excel locally deployed, would you send a document to somebody and they couldn't open it, or certain features didn't work because you had a configuration mismatch and that you were running, Word 10 and somebody else was running Word 7 or something like that? It was very common, right? And so by moving it to the cloud, what happens is that everybody's running on the same version, and if somebody's a version behind, it just completely says click here and you can update, right? And so from a SASE perspective, if I've got hundreds or thousands of possibly now firewall instances running from the cloud for all my branch offices, I'd never be able to manage that manually, right? Trying to do it with on-premises firewalls. The other analogy is Nokia versus iPhone is a good example, because Nokia was frankly, Nokia had made some really good equipment, and but what they did was they made the integration point for all of that good technology. They made the integration point the user, right? And because if you wanted to be able to put music on the phone, you had to download the music yourself and put it in a certain directory and go in the phone and point it to that directory, right? And so although it was a very technically advanced piece of equipment, if you make the user the integration point, it's not going to work. What Apple did was they made the interface so sophisticated that they masked a lot of that complexity. I think that's what SASE does from an IT perspective. Instead of the IT person having to make sure all the policies are aligned and you've got traffic's flowing through the security chain properly, you do that for them in the cloud. And so you're enabling them to go to a much more complex, a much more sophisticated security model, but you're masking the complexity for them. So it's easy on the IT side, but you still wind up with better security.
We call it those moving from a change agent to change Sherpa, basically, to take our customers and members throughout this journey.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good distinction where sometimes things that it takes a lot of engineering work to make things simple.
Well, I think we've all had or experienced some type of Microsoft or Excel formatting issues once in our lifetime.
Yes.
But moving on to myth 4, guys. SASE primarily secures corporate networks. Is this true? Is this not true? Let's debunk this one for the audience. Amit,
if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure.
So,
Amit, why don't you take it?
Look, today, cloud and mobility basically breaking the corporate networks. They do not exist. You can think about that today the corporate network is the internet, right? You work from home, you work with Zoom, it's a completely new atmosphere. And SASE basically unifies and brings that security and networking that organizations had on the corporate network that was around the premise and the physical location to the internet. Okay, and that's my point of view. So I don't think it's usually SASE today is targeted more for corporates, of course, although later on consumers can also enjoy similar solutions and security, but they really focused around about the corporate, but not specifically the corporate network. I think that the change organizations are making today to enable, right, and to exchange their perimeter to the internet, to the cloud, which the corporate network does not exist as we know it, right, is taking shape, and SASE is a great, and I think there is a consensus in the market and also between analysts and customers and vendors that that's the way to go. Yeah, that don't have anything to add.
Yeah, well, I think the key that what you mentioned there is it depends on what you call the corporate network, right? Like consumers aren't really going to buy SASE, although in a way they do, right? When you subscribe to your ISP and you use their cloud security, you're in effect buying SASE, right? But from a company perspective, the corporate network now has changed dramatically. The corporate network used to be, I'm going to connect branch offices to my data centers to my corporate headquarters. And today, the corporate network is, and you did that over private IP services like MPLS or some sort of IP VPN type of service, right? Today, the corporate network is now those branch offices, data centers, corporate headquarters, but it's also cloud locations, edge locations, remote workers, home workers, really anywhere that you have corporate assets, even down the road with 5G connectivity, IoT endpoints will be part of your corporate network. If you think of like a retailer and they've got connected point of sale devices, right? That's part of your corporate network. And so so in a way, SASE is for the corporate network, but it's just a much greater expanded definition of the corporate network, right? Which is now really every asset that the organization owns or comes in contact with. In fact, a lot of the partner connectivity that you have, if you're a financial services firm, you do work with a bunch of correspondent companies. Healthcare does, hospitals do work with insurance companies. You can protect yourself that way as well from a lot of those backdoor type of attacks that happen today. And so, so I think the answer in some ways is that the myth isn't that it's for corporate networks as it is the myth is that the corporate network is what it once was, because it's it's greatly expanded from there. And again, if you're watching this, SASE is the only way you can secure some of those. There's just no cost-effective, practical way to be able to secure all those edge locations, home workers, remote workers, using traditional technology. Somebody like Amit can probably afford to have, a big firewall in their home office, but not too many other people can. So, I think that this becomes really the only way you can do it. Just like with the cloud became, really the only way to build, certain types of applications where you want to be able to access resources from multiple, from multiple cloud providers and things. And so it is a change that's going on. In fact, most of the IT stack has already moved this way. It's just in networking and security, we're a little behind because we're so paranoid of change.
Absolutely.
I loved your answer, Zeus.
What's that?
I loved your answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't fear the change though, because it's going to hold your company back if you don't do it.
I see.
I want to let everyone in the audience know that I see there are a few questions, and we are closely coming up on the Q&A session, so all those questions will be answered. Moving on to the final and fifth myth, SASE is only for enterprise. So Zeus, why don't you kick this last one off?
Yeah, well, that's an easy thing to think because the security needs for enterprises are so great. But frankly, SASE is for companies of any size, right? Even down to individual locations that perhaps couldn't afford to buy your traditional type of security model. And so if you've got connected resources, you need SASE. And again, I think a lot of the SASE adoption started with large enterprises because they were highly distributed. They had lots of branch offices and things like that. But you could be a 10-site commercial bank, or a regional bank, and you're still going to have to secure those assets, those branch offices, remote workers, things like that. And I think the big pivot here is this shift to work from home and more remote access. In fact, one of the data points from my research is pre-pandemic, about 22% of workers work from home. At its peak, that was in the 70s. And it'll settle in around the 40%. So you're looking at, over time, at a doubling of the number of remote workers in about a year and a half. And so the question is, how do I secure those? And if you want to give everybody in your company corporate-grade security, or enterprise-grade security, even if you're a small company, right? SASE is the way to do that. And so I think that was a lot of the initial low-hanging fruit was large enterprises because of the distributed nature. But clearly, it's every company, down to the smallest, can benefit from it.
Amit, do you have something to share? I'm sure you have something locked and loaded.
So SASE is absolutely not only for enterprise. So I think that one of the advantages of SASE that it's a software-based solution, and it's accessible, highly accessible, and you don't need to buy a very expensive appliance that has a minimum of 200 employees in order for it to make sense economically, right? Okay, any company can start very easily and to consume it, just like any company can sign up to Office 365 and Gmail, right?
Yeah.
Previously, you had the Microsoft Exchange, right? Only very large enterprises could afford them to buy the Exchange server. Today, Office 365 is accessible to any company from any size because it's modern, it's a software-based, it's very easy to use. And today, for example, in Perimeter 81, any company can go to Perimeter 81, create their network in the cloud without even speaking with us, utilizing a credit card. Any company from 5 employees to the largest enterprises in the world. So that's something that is very flexible. And I think that's also a very big say because currently, as of just recently, enterprise-grade cybersecurity solutions were not accessible for the small and medium-sized businesses, right? So what SASE is also benefiting in the world that is basically enabling enterprise-grade security available for all. So,
yeah, and I think one of the important things he talked about there, Wally, it was the ability to grow, right? So I think historically, if you're going to go buy like a firewall from one of the big iron vendors, you almost have to, in an organization that's growing fast, you have to make a decision. Do I buy for today's needs, right? Or do I buy for what I think I might be in a year? But if I buy for today's needs, I'm going to run out of capacity and have to do an upgrade. But if I buy for a year from now or 2 years from now, now I'm massively overspending what I need today, right? And this is very common when you buy hardware. You have to make that decision of, do I buy for today or do I buy for the future? And if you buy for the future, you're spending an awful lot of extra money that you might not need down the road. And so with SASE, because it is cloud-based, it is subscription-based, you can buy exactly what you need today and then ramp up and ramp down. And so for a seasonal organization, you think of like accounting firms, at tax time, you think of retailers between Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? Organizations like that, SASE is ideally suited because you can scale up and down as the business needs. And so, and that's where companies that are even like medium-sized could become big enterprises for certain times during the year, right? When they hire a lot of contractors and then scale back down. And so it's really ideally suited for business. It makes security much more agile, and that's something all companies can use, because frankly, business agility is critical today, but you're only as agile as your IT lets you be, right? And so security is one of those things that always gets in the way, but with SASE it doesn't have to.
Absolutely. Guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate all the insights and all your great commentary on debunking all of these SASE myths. Really great stuff here. I would like to move on to the Q&A stage. We do have several questions here that have been asked. The first one is, I'm a bit confused by the need for SASE in an SD-WAN solution, seeing that the SD-WAN services I am aware of do come with their own security features and options. Zeus, would you be interested in answering this one?
Sure, and so that depends on what they mean by security services, right? So a lot of SD-WAN vendors do have SASE services, and so they have that because there's a need for SASE with SD-WAN. Now, historically, when SD-WAN first launched, if you think back to 5-6 years ago, we didn't. What SD-WAN was a replacement for your traditional WAN equipment using the internet as transport, right? And in that model, the security needs were very similar to what you had in the old model, because all you were doing was you were taking out your MPLS and inserting broadband, but you still maintained that hub and spoke architecture. You still routed most of your security through one centralized point. You might have encrypted the traffic over the internet, but ultimately you didn't really change things. Then when organizations started and this is very typical, and if you deployed this early on, I don't want to make you feel bad, because it's very typical of the adoption of any technology. We always make the new technology look like the old technology, right? The first PC-based application was the mainframe emulator, right? So we like new technology to look like old technology. Then we figure out things we can do with that we couldn't do before. I can connect remote workers. I can do split tunnel, right, and do direct access to the cloud. And when that happens, now my security needs have changed, right? And so the traditional security model doesn't work. And that's why a lot of the SD-WAN vendors have added SASE to their portfolio. And so the big change here, though, to answer your question, is you're right. Most of the SD-WAN vendors do have their own SASE services, but you don't have to couple the two together, is the point. You can buy SASE standalone just for the security capabilities and do SD-WAN later, where a lot of the SD-WAN vendors started selling their own security because they had to help their customers secure their SD-WAN. And so that became part of their portfolio. But the two, think of them as Venn diagrams. You can do SD-WAN, you can do SASE, you can do both together. But you're right. It's a good question because all the SD-WAN vendors do couple security. Just make sure that when you're looking at that SD-WAN vendor, that those security services are cloud-based, though, because if they're your traditional on-prem, if they're served up out of a router or out of a firewall, right, that's not really going to get you the same benefits as what a Midnight was talking about.
I actually have a question that I want to direct to you, Amit, because I think it's perfect for you. There's a lot of SASE vendors, and it could be difficult when evaluating which is the right solution for me or my company. What is it that you need to look for in a SASE vendor?
So first of all, you need when you look into a SASE vendor, right? You need to check a few things. One is the use case, right? To think what is the use case that you'd like to start with? Either it's an interconnectivity, remote access, or internet security. Today, the SASE space still evolving, right? There are vendors that are more strong in remote access, and other vendors that are stronger in SD-WAN capabilities, for example. So what is more urgent for you, right? The second thing that you need to evaluate is the ease of use and how fast and easy can I get started, what it is requiring for me, right? Whether I need to replace my existing equipment or I can integrate to everything that I have, right? What is the investment that is needed on my side? And the third one that I also highly recommend to invest is whether the vendor offers, right, the end-by-end guidance, right, an architecture implementation that will help you through that migration to SASE and how to implement it in the best way you can.
Absolutely. So is there anything you think people should be looking for in their SaaS vendor from your perspective?
Yeah, I think this comes down to there are a lot of SASE vendors out there, and I think you need to think about the security services that you need and what type of organization you have, and then be able to map those capabilities to the vendors, right? And so the SASE vendors that you get, or the SASE services, the security services you get from a SASE vendor tend to vary quite a bit vendor to vendor, right? And so some are strong in ZTNA, some are strong in firewall, some are, and so from your own due diligence perspective, make sure that your roadmap is or the services that they have map nicely to the type of environment you have. For instance, there's a lot of companies that are going to maintain a large work from home population post COVID, even once people start going back to the office, right? And so from that perspective, you should make sure that the vendor has the type of remote access capabilities like Perimeter 81 has, where it makes that remote connectivity very simple, right? So I think it's there's no, I can't definitively tell you that one story, guys, that Perimeter 81 is better than everybody, right? Or this vendor is. It really depends on your needs, and so you want to do your due diligence and make sure it maps correctly there. So.
Perfect. So there is one more question, and feel free, everyone in the audience, if you do want to submit some more, feel free to do so. There are lots of different components that make up a full SASE solution. Which ones do you believe are important to prioritize and why? So I think, Zeus, why don't you start with this one, and we'll have Amit close it up.
Yeah, I think, in some ways I kind of answered the last question, but I do think like I said, the remote access capabilities are extremely important today, just given the dynamic of the way we work, right? So if you are going to maintain a large work from home population, you want to be able to give everybody at home the same kind of security that you have in the office, and frankly, the same kind of security regardless of where they're located. I think there's an axiom in security that says you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? And so if you have even one worker at home who doesn't have that type of, the corporate grade security, you're putting your company at risk, right? And so I think from that perspective, that's important. I think also you want to make sure you have network-based firewall, right? Because that becomes important in being able to connect people to the cloud. And then other things I would think about are, zero trust and segmentation, especially once you get into a lot of IoT type deployments, things like that I think are coming. So, to me, off the top of my head, those are, the primary ones. So, Amit, you might think differently there.
No, I think that the reality basically is setting the face, and the fact that today all the employees are outside the office and resources are moving to the cloud. Definitely, I would prioritize remote access and secure internet in the first place. It's also easier to get started with remote access because you're replacing a VPN, something that is everybody hates, right? When an IT manager comes and says we are having a replacement to the VPN, everyone happy, right? It increases the productivity. It's not interfering with the work. It's much easier. It's much more secure. So definitely something that it's easier to implement, easier to bind the employees to utilize that solution. Also the management, right, to recognize it. It drives productivity, it reduces cost. It's very easy to work. It increases security. Only positive things, in my opinion. So it's definitely a great place to start, in my opinion, today.
Yeah, in fact, your question, Michael, around what are the security services you should have, I think you could make that a little more complete a question. What are the capabilities you need to have? Because you mentioned the portal that you have, right? The management tool. That is as important as any other security feature. There's a saying in security that says you can't secure what you can't see, right? So your ability to have that visibility across your network, the visibility into that centralized management console, things like that will go a long way into helping you make sure that what you're deploying is correct. So just the technical capabilities alone are great, but you need to have the ability to manage and secure it in order to actually have a successful deployment.
Wonderful. Yeah, some really great questions today. Before we say our goodbyes, for anyone that has any further questions, I want you guys to please feel free to contact us anytime at marketing@perimeter81.com. And also you can feel free to contact Zeus at zeus@zkresearch.com or at zcaravala on Twitter. Really easy to find him. And please feel free to reach out at any time. And just before we go, I just want to thank you both for your time, Zeus and Amit. Really, really great stuff here. We can tell that there's a very bright future for the world of SASE. So thank you guys for sharing all that great information.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Zeus. It was a pleasure talking with you today.
No, thank you. This was good. This is it's a very important topic. I think the world's changed a lot in the last year, right? I think that the one thing I want to leave people with is, from an IT perspective, you need to think about, who knows what's going to happen in the future, right? But you have to think about your organization having everybody in the office, nobody in the office, and every possible combination in between, right? And how you secure that, you cannot do that with old school tools. So SASE isn't just some fancy buzzwords made up by us analysts. It's an actual it's a critical evolution of how we think about and deploy and architect security in a way that's going to meet those needs in the future. Because I think the one thing that COVID taught us is we really have no idea what's coming, right? The business landscape changes so fast. And if you don't, companies that, if you had deployed SASE, you would have had a very easy time getting everybody working from home. And, if you hadn't, there's lots and lots of companies struggling. So it's, this is a really important topic.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Guys.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone in the audience, so much. Really greatly appreciated. Feel free to share it if you felt it was relevant for anyone else. And guys, thank you again. Have a great day, a great evening. All the best.
All the best. Thank you very much, Michael.
Bye, everybody. Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.